Welcome to the Veteran Psychedelic Discourse. We are a group that advocates for safe and responsible exploration of mental health treatments, and this is not a platform for the solicitation of illegal substances. Welcome everybody. It's our December show. So myself and Brian, we're wrapping up our year at school, finishing up the term, and we came across some study articles we wanted to be able to touch base with you guys on, just to have a little conversation on that, and then we're going to take it from there. Brian, did you want to talk about how you came across these?
Well, yeah, actually, Guy sent us an article earlier in the month, and it was talking about Ukraine, what's going on there, new PTSD treatments for military vets. They're using ketamine to explore options for treatment among the veterans that are actively fighting right now. The potential here, I think Alex and I were talking about this. It's funny because like throughout the 1980s, we saw the war on drugs, and now we're seeing the war on drugs, where drugs are being used to facilitate a more effective warfighting force. So it's pretty fascinating. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that and kind of put this in the feed. Well, I guess we'll put it in the YouTube video just so anybody can check it out. Guy, do you mind if I ask where you came across this?
On the internet, I
Gotcha.
can't remember.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
Okay. I maybe if I think about it, it'll come. But it was, yeah. I zoomed through so many different things, looking for so many, and it just, I remember we had talked about it a little bit, and so thought it might clarify a little bit.
Is it from like a social media page that like focuses on like sharing similar types of articles, or you just found it out in the wild?
I'm not on any of the social media things, but
Okay.
I do, Google various ones and kind of stuff that just relates to veterans and psychedelics and, brain chemistry, things like that. And yeah, actually, I'd have to go back and review the article to remember everything that was in it. I just try to cover lots of things like that. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Alex had been mentioning one of our previous guests has spent the last few months in Ukraine. What was the treatment they were doing?
It was ketamine.
Ketamine, okay, yeah. I wanted to kind of spend the day discussing like some experiences I've had that have kind of changed my views on psychedelics and also SSRIs, and particularly like brain function and exactly what's going on when we consume these substances. A few years ago, some meta studies came out showing that the SSRIs didn't work the way that we thought they did. We thought that they were creating an antidepressant effect by affecting serotonin uptake. But we've got enough evidence now to show that that's not the case. In fact, I ran across one study that said you're 15% more likely to have an antidepressant effect from taking a sugar pill than you were from an antidepressant. So there's some very interesting stuff going on here regarding SSRIs and maybe their efficacy, because we're just not entirely sure what's going on there. And I think in some ways you could probably argue it's probably a placebo effect or like an appeal to authority, because you have a doctor who's telling you this is going to make you feel less depressed, so you feel less depressed as a result of it. But so this kind of brings me to one of the things I learned about psychedelics a few years ago, and its effect on this gene called the TRKB gene. And in the research paper I was reading about this, they talked about how when the TRKB gene gets activated, it turns on what we perceive as an antidepressant effect. And I kind of left it at that, but that was pretty interesting. But you could definitely see why it was working. I just didn't understand in the larger sense of how SSRIs are working, and maybe that there might be an issue between the two. So I spent some time looking into how do you create TRKB, or what can you do to encourage its production. And I started learning about the neurotransmitter glutamate. And what's really interesting is psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, DMT. Well, actually, I'm not sure about DMT, but I'd wager. But they increase glutamates, and glutamate's a neurotransmitter. And when you increase the production of glutamate, you're actually going to start producing this protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And you create this ecosystem between the glutamate and the BDNF, where you're now going to begin to produce more glutamate as a result of having BDNF, which will create more BDNF, thus more glutamate. So it creates like an ecosystem that's self-sustaining, which is very fascinating, as long as you can keep your glutamate production up. Now, what happens after that is now you've got this protein that's out there, BDNF, and this is where the TRKB gene comes in. The TRKB gene binds to the protein BDNF, and this creates what we observe as neuronal growth and synaptic plasticity, the ability to change your mind and adjust. And so if that's what's happening in the TRKB gene when you are binding with BDNF and you're creating that antidepressant effect, and we can observe that it's creating neuronal growth and synaptic plasticity, it leads me to question, well, is that what antidepressant is that what the antidepressant effect really is? The ability to be flexible, the ability to perceive things in new ways and to grow. And so I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, because that I think is really a lot of people's psychedelic experiences. You have these moments where the rigidity of your consciousness kind of snaps and you're forced to have a new perspective or look at things in a different way. And so I started wondering what SSRIs do to glutamate. What I found was they do have some effect on glutamate production. It's like, it's not as effective, and they're like longer term results, maybe not as intense. And so it occurred to me that potentially what we're doing is when we bring guys home from Iraq and we put them on these SSRI protocols, what we're doing is we're giving them a drug that's not going to do anything to help them develop the neuronal plasticity necessary in order to reintegrate themselves in society at large after their military experience. And instead, what we're doing is we're giving them a drug that's going to regulate or decrease the uptake of their serotonins. So you won't have the highs, and you'll just kind of have the moderate middles, and you'll stay there. And I think the issue that I'm running into is it seems like the drug that the SSRIs are almost like, when I think about it, I think about the idea of coming to a world that makes you depressed, so you take a drug. And instead of feeling more happy or joy, you just begin to feel more regulated with that mild depression. And I think the thing that gets me, and this is maybe more subjective observation from people that I've seen taking SSRIs, my own experiences, but when you're not able to engage life on life's terms and address things flexibly and be present because your brain's not producing the necessary chemicals in order to engage in that kind of flexibility, it almost seems like you're creating the conditions wherein someone will begin to live an ever smaller life. Every day it just keeps getting smaller and smaller as their experiences confront them, and they lack like the brain development necessary to integrate themselves or adjust to these new changes. And I think a lot of this is what we see is kind of some of the hallmarks of PTSD, and maybe some ways why PTSD gets compounded over time if it's not treated, so that was kind of my takeaway. I've been bothered by this whole concept that the SSRIs don't work, and that I've never really heard anybody put their finger on why they don't work, or maybe what the alternative of what's happening is. So what Alex and I were talking about before the show started, maybe we could pick up here, is this is all great information, whatever. What can you do with it? Well, there's ways to affect glutamate production outside of the use of psychedelics. And this is what I was saying to Alex. It would be interesting to use like a protocol where you use some of these strategies in order to develop your glutamate production, and thus see if you can identify any antidepressant effect over like a month-long timeline. So some of the most obvious ones for glutamates, we've all heard this before, but it's going to be exercise. You're going to want to go out and exercise. That's probably one of the best ways for you to produce glutamate naturally in your own body. We hear this all the time from all kinds of places, and perhaps this is maybe a bit more of an understanding of what hormones are being created to elicit the effect that we're feeling. When people talk about things like the runner's high, or like the pump when you're working out, and like that like intense sense of like happiness and satisfaction. The other one that I think is really interesting is it's meditation. meditation is another great way to induce the production of glutamate. And what's really interesting, the paper I was reading, they were reviewing some transcendental meditators, and what they found was that they had highly effective glutamate production systems. And what the point they were making was, essentially, as soon as they're making the glutamate, it's being converted into, or sorry, it's interacting with the BDNF, and then it's binding with the TRKB and creating like this really like well-developed system that works super efficiently. So I think if you're looking to have like immediate changes in your feeling to produce more glutamate, doing some exercise is great. But if you want really long-term effects of developing your production and your ability to, you know, just overall feel better, meditation seems like it's probably about the most passive strategy you could take. And I think that was really my big thing, because we're looking at all these wandering like technical jargon terms, and really what we've just come down to is like basically like kind of the root of Eastern philosophy: meditate and take care of your body. Like, so I found the whole thing to be very fascinating, like how you start in this weird like place of confusion about modern science, and you end up at the doorstep. I was joking with Alex, it sounds like what Shaolin monks do. Like, you know, it's like you're just reinventing everything that's already been done. So I don't know, I just thought I'd share that with you guys. I thought it was real interesting because I'd never considered the role of glutamate in an antidepressant effect, and I think really that's all a lot of us are looking for. We want to feel okay with how things are going now, and like we're living lives that matter and mean something to us. The meaning point, I think, is actually the really important one. I would actually argue that the addiction that we see in a lot of people is actually them responding to this glutamate cycle, wherein they're able to take drugs that elicit this response. As a result of that, they're able to engage in some synaptic plasticity that allows them to experience bad stuff, but to not be bothered by it and put it aside and continue engaging in the behavior that's going to allow them to continue having the production of the glutamate, so they continue to feel better and not depressed about things, even though things are happening in their lives that are highly depressing. And so the whole point of all this would be, while you're trying to improve your glutamate production, I think focusing on Viktor Frankl's concept of the importance of meaning in life would be a really big one. You know, synaptic plasticity and neuronal growth is great, especially when it means something.
Yeah, you're reminding me, first of all, the idea that you were saying that SSRIs might not have as intense of a creation in glutamate, but might have a more prolonged effect.
They were saying that it was different, but that it's a more long-term effect. Whereas what I'm arguing is when you take these substances, as they're integrated into your body, they begin to produce the augment the effective production. Excuse me, they begin to augment how much is produced. Whereas with the SSRIs, it seems like it's more of a secondary effect that happens over a longer term. And I would argue, when I'm hearing that, what I hear not as intensely.
Okay, you're reminding me of a study that I kind of want to pull up, and maybe I'll add it to the notes if I can, if I find it. But I feel like um, the common practice is to wean off SSRIs before you do any type of psychedelics, as far as MDMA. I think they do that for um, psilocybin, and what is it that they were doing in
Ketamine?
Ukraine? Ketamine. But I feel like I saw a study somewhat recently about how that is changing, that people are less worried and concerned about the idea of weaning off before going into it. So I'm curious if there's like a prolonged benefit you could have, even if it's slight, from SSRIs, but then also playing it from both ends as far as meditation, just good holistic health practices, as well as um, a psychedelic practice, if that would be the way to kind of get the most comprehensive benefit.
The concern that I have with SSRIs is I actually feel like they're at odds with classical psychedelics like psilocybin and lysergic. Because what psilocybin and lysergic is going to do is target the 5-HT, excuse me, 5H2, 5-HT2A receptor, and it's going to improve serotonin uptake, whereas the SSRIs are uptake inhibitors.
Hmm.
You kind of see what the issue is there?
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about this to say anything definitively, but like when I'm looking at this, like they're like pieces of Legos to fit together, I'm like, that doesn't fit, you know? So
Question: if someone went to a vitamin store, vitamin shop, and got glutamate, would the more glutamate, would that make things, you know, work better in this
I
respect?
would I would argue probably better than before, but one of the things that I'm always big on is like trying to figure out how to endogenously produce this stuff. Um, so man, going for a walk for a mile or two, or like just literally taking time to meditate, you might save yourself a little bit of cash and you might actually get a much better effect out of it. The thing I would argue is as your body comes online with this isn't going to be like an overnight, like you're not taking a pill with this. So it's going to be like a 30-day practice of you putting it into place and then evaluating it after the fact. But I would argue with any kind of vitamin, when you take it, you'll have more of whatever you had before, whatever supplement you're taking. Sorry, not vitamin, but whatever supplement. I'm not sure you can get glutamate though. I've never looked into this.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it turns out you can get glutamate supplements, and they're called like brain drive capsules, or so they seem to be pretty heavily focused on cognition. Yeah, that would be interesting. If you do that, I would be very interested to hear what your findings are. Oh, in addition, B6 is also a huge factor in converting glutamine into glutamate. So that might be a positive one to look into if you're looking to improve your body's glutamate production. And
Is
just
that
in general,
peroxidine?
I'm sorry.
Peroxidine. B6 is peroxidine.
I think it's a few different things. I've heard
Okay.
B6. Let me look it up real quick. Yeah, normally it's just labeled. I can't remember what the peroxidine. Yeah, you're right. Correct. Yeah.
Where should we take this?
Well, I think the thing that I was wondering about is, and this is where we kind of started the conversation before, was what can we do in our own lives in order to not only just like improve them using this kind of like practice, but like how do you turn around and like share this with other people in a meaningful way? You know what I mean? What does that look like to share this info in a way that other people can receive it? Because I would have a hard time if I was on SSRIs for 5 or 6 years and feeling moderately better than I had when I first started taking them, if I was confronted by the fact that maybe none of the science is lining up regarding how these pills work.
That's a rough one because you have
Well,
a
and
lot of people that are just
that's kind
good.
of how I got here, because like I'm in school and they're still teaching us all about these SSRIs, and there's really no to the fact that like we've learned some new things that are concerning.
Yeah. What year was that study published?
I think 2022. And so that maybe that speaks to some of the frustration or confusion I have, because like I'm watching us know that this isn't the right thing to do and nothing's changing. It's been 2 years and nothing's really changed. And I wonder how long it will take for us to begin to adjust our average best treatment. Because man, you can just get SSRIs from general practitioners. They'll load you up.
And a lot of their citations are they're not too old. They're like 2014, 2006, um, basically from 2003 to now, talking about 5-HTT gene. Um, okay. Yeah, what would be the best way to approach someone that's like that reminds me of a friend that I have, and he recently had his primary care at the VA change the staff, and so they called him and said, just to let you know, we're going to switch your medication to something less what we see as severe. And he said, wait, it's taken me 7 years to get my dosage and medication locked on so that I'm feeling well. And they're like, yeah, but since we're new with you, we want to monitor you through the process to see if that is, from our point of view, the best path to go. He's like, you're just my primary care that switched out. It's like this, read the notes type of thing. So it sucks that people are kind of just, even if they find something that works in a system like the VA, they'll just pull the rug out from under you, and you're gonna have to find an alternative. So I wonder if someone like that is um, looking at a study like this, if they might change their approach. And it might take a situation like that to be willing to throw away the all the time and effort, the attachment to the time put in to get to that point, because that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
If you put in 7 years and it's like your mental health and you've been struggling for a long time, and you finally get to something that's a little bit better, a little bit of solace, and then someone gives you an alternative, it's like how much would you fight it if you're convinced it still might be the path?
I think the thing that worries me is I don't think SSRIs were ever meant to be like long-term solutions. I think they were meant to just be like a therapeutic that was meant to be used short-term during like a period of rehabilitation. when I say rehabilitation, I mean like therapeutic, addressing something that's going on. And instead, like here's the problem that I have with the SSRIs as I see just so many people who there's just less personality in them after they start taking them. Now, when I think about that from the perspective of like America and like corporate interests and all that, it makes for really great employees who just show up to work and do the same thing every day without having a whole lot of big emotions about it, without having a whole lot of inconsistency in their life. So I always wonder about approaching it from that angle, that maybe this isn't the best treatment for you, but it's the most convenient for your employer. I think we talked about that with the Marcus Capone guy who was trying to get insurance companies to recognize the value of sending people off for psychedelic treatments while they were working instead of having them take 6 months off at a time for leave because they're burned out from working.
I was prescribed some SSRI. Mine was Silexa. Is that one? This was in the 90s. And it was my doctor. I couldn't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And my doctor seemed to think that an antidepressant would help. And it seemed to me that I couldn't really think beyond 3 seconds as far as, projecting outward. It just seemed to blunt everything. And it didn't really seem to help me sleep that much more. And then I tried some mushrooms. We were in Ireland and found some Liberty caps and tried them, and nothing happened. And I went to after Desert Storm, I went to a weekend, I think it was in Wilsonville with Terrence McKenna in 92, and asked him about that. And he said, yeah, that just probably won't work because, your, I don't know if the receptors were filled up or whatever. But yeah, it seemed, and that's, I think, as far as this being a solution, it doesn't really approach the problem that a vet would have. It just kind of numbs it over so they don't think about it. It just kind of keeps it so they don't, they don't have, bad feelings or good feelings. They're just kind of, at this existence level.
Yeah, I totally concur with that. I actually would argue that like a lot of people would call that successful use of the medicine for a therapeutic. That's my point though, is like the things that they're willing to call normal living, the average person would identify as depressed. So rather than making you not depressed, they just shut down your serotonin receptors so you don't have any because when you get really happy and then you get really depressed, that's what the problem is. So you just don't really ever get too happy. So there's never really a big bump between like your happiness and your sadness. When the disparity is normally what bothers most people. I was so happy yesterday. Why am I sad now? So you're just kind of left in this place where you've got room for about that much emotion.
That's what it seemed like for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was what you said there earlier about the serotonin receptors. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's inhibiting them. It's shutting down their ability to uptake. So it's kind of like that's what psilocybin's doing is it's supposed to be turning on those receptors. So yeah, it's fascinating to consider the interactions between those two. I mean, on my end, that's pretty much all I've got. I just kind of wanted to get that out there. Just kind of maybe make some connections between the potential for glutamate to induce an antidepressant effect rather than these traditional SSRIs. And the whole point is you don't even need psychedelics. You can do other things as long as you understand what you're keying in on,
Kind of like what you were talking about with like the monks.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I would argue that actually to know this is what creates like a level of belief that allows it to be even more potent, because it goes back to the SSRIs. I genuinely believe a lot of reason why these SSRI works is just a placebo effect. You have a doctor who's telling you you're not going to feel depressed after you take this pill because most other people don't feel depressed after they take this pill. That can be a total lie, but because it's a doctor who you trust, you're going to do it. And then your brain is going to integrate that experience and it's going to be waiting to feel not depressed because the doctor who's the authority told you you'd feel not depressed. And so the whole thing is like just this ruse, and it's just about you having faith in the competence of the medical industry that keeps you not depressed. And the truth is like there's a lot of better options out there than limiting your emotions to a tiny window.
Sure. Yeah, and there's the problem of people just kind of giving up all they just leave it up to the doctor and they don't really take their own health into their own hands. I struggle with doing that sometimes, but I do come back around and realize that it's something to do. I gotta be my own doctor, so to speak. But as far as like, because I know where the pain is and I know where things are lacking and I know where how I could feel better. I'm just not I'm just trying to tell a doctor and try to be as eloquent as I can and then see what they give me to see if it fixes the problem and then I wait for months to see if it works.
I think it was Hippocrates. I could be wrong, but he says if you're not your own doctor, you're a fool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like it's your body.
Mhm.
No one else cares, man. You're the only one who can feel what it feels like on the inside.
And if
Oh.
you're your own lawyer, it's even worse, right?
True. Yeah. 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 It does not cross professions.
Um, Brian, did you care to talk about what you're going to be doing this month?
Oh yeah. Okay. So in the background, like so as I'm studying psychology, what I'm realizing is like all these people who come up with all these ideas are jacking all of this stuff from old religions and like older practices and just like reinterpreting it for the modern world that we live in right now. Like DBT is just like Hegelian dialectic mixed with Buddhism. They're just like mashing these things together into multiple different frameworks. And so because I'm seeing this old wisdom being used in the present, it causes me to go back and research some of these old practices. One of the things I got introduced to a while ago was this process, and I don't know if it's real or not, but whatever. The whole point of it is it's to go through like a process of like clean living. And what I'm aiming for is during my zodiac window for this month, which will be the 21st to the 21st of December, 21st of January. I'm gonna try to do like I don't know how to put this, but like live like Christ. You know what I mean? Like try to like abstain from things and like fast and don't drink and spend time in meditation and just try to make it all the whole process a really spiritual one. I was telling Alex like for me personally, like I dig this idea because like I have Christmas coming up, I have my birthday coming up, I've got New Year's coming up. All of these are great reasons to drink. So what better month to take off than the month of December? So the whole concept, this could be a whole nother episode. So we have this stuff called cerebral spinal fluid in our body. We're finding more research about it and understanding that it goes on a journey through our body throughout the year. What I'm proposing is that this ties into some of what the old ancients were doing with like kundalini rising and all that stuff, or sexual alchemistry, wherein you allow this cerebral spinal fluid to go through this process down your 33 vertebrae to your sacrum and then back up into your brain where it reintegrates itself. We'll see what happens, guys. I'm looking forward to the experience. It'll be fun to take time to do something deliberately, like meditate, or I think in some ways, like you were talking about seeking counsel from doctors and how easy that is. And it's like I think we forget sometimes our health is literally our job, and we get so distracted by our other jobs that we have that we don't take care of the main job that we have, caring for our own personal health. So just a little fun experiment. I'll be sure to let you guys know in January how it all works out. You
Um,
you tried this, right?
I did. I did. Yeah. I'm trying to recall. Definitely didn't come out enlightened or anything like that. So I wouldn't say. I'm trying to recall what it is where we first found out about this process so that I could share it with in the description in case people want to look into that themselves. But I feel like there is mental clarity to get out of it for sure. Just at least.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, for me, the whole idea of just doing something deliberate is just so important. You know, putting your intention behind something, especially if you can find a way to make a ritual out of it. You know.
Yeah. I mean, not to bring up old Marine Corps sayings, but to know yourself and seek self-improvement. Like when you find
Mm,
something that's clearly like a hole in your games, like somewhat of a weakness for a lot of people that have been in the military. You know, there's um, the culture of drinking, and
mm,
so that might be a good one for many people to explore. But yeah, to take time off and you kind of challenge yourself, do some fasting. Fasting is one that I haven't done in a long time, and I've been thinking about it recently. If that would be good to explore again, because the places that your mind goes and the rationales your mind you will give yourself to to go back and indulge in this behavior that you just deliberately like set forward to like step away from just to like challenge yourself. It's the mental gymnastics you'll take yourself through. It's very revealing about like who you are when in a time of crisis, suffering, or being challenged. And I think that could be it could be good insight for when you're just for growth and like going into a new stage of life. So I would recommend it. Just to try.
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I realize, and maybe this is just me personally, but one of the hardest things in life is to be able to take something, but then not take it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Have something there that you could just take, but then choose not to take it. And I think that that's kind of
Discipline.
like, yeah, exactly. That's kind of like what this is modeling that and trying to engage in it, not just for a moment or for a day, but like make it a practice, you know?
Yeah, yeah, well, because right, having the thing that you want right there on the shelf and then not going after it. I mean, it's interesting, especially when talking on the in general about mental health among veterans. Again, drinking a big part of the culture and a lot of veterans' lives, but I forget who it was that I heard talking about this, but they're basically saying how people drink a lot when they're talking about when they're considering like their when trying to like put away their trauma from the past or the anxieties from the future because it kind of forces you to be present in that moment when you're drinking. You know what I mean?
It, it does another thing too. It forces you to be present and it also quiets your amygdala. So the thing that's got you all heightened, it's shutting it down.
Yeah, so it's to 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 take that break off of away from that, it's definitely putting yourself into, I feel like it puts you more in like a flight or flight type of primed state. But yeah, I think it's interesting because the whole idea of presence is very much, meditation, this whole like Eastern philosophy side of things. And I feel like it's an unhealthy hack, so to speak. It's very easy to get to that state of being present just by having your drinks, but to do it in a different way, the method kind of dictates the efficacy and like how well it plays out, the execution. And I think we see a lot of people uh, recognizing the suffering, or maybe not, but from the easier method.
I'm fascinated by some of the choice of words you use, and I really like it. The fight or flight. It occurs to me that the consequence of you being disciplined is you're killing the weaker parts of yourself. It
Hmm.
literally is a death. It's a death of a desire, even if it's only an imaginary one. That's why we experience pain and suffering in our imagination. It's still a death. It's you putting to death something inside of you that you want.
Hmm.
That's a hard thing to do over and over again.
Well, sure. And if we're considering like the analogy of like the two dogs that are within you, and one of them's discipline and other one is wanting to indulge, it's like as that one becomes more hungry, it's going to become a little bit more ravenous. And so that it becomes the part of people that is very hard to deal with. And that's like the idea of a relapse. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to be able to consider the idea if you're wanting change and you want what you're seeing as an improvement into stepping away from something like alcohol or whatever that's not serving you, but you have trouble doing so, is not seeing a relapse as like a failure that is making you go back to square one, so to speak. It's more of like an opportunity for insight into seeing where the trip falls are on the path that you have.
What you're talking about, those kind of outside the mainstream of AA, though, that's kind of like and I think what you're saying is a lot more effective. But yeah, that's definitely not the attitude that you get when you go out and seek sobriety in a community. It's normally like this all or nothing, like,
Right, the
yeah,
abstinence, right,
yeah.
the abstinence idea, and that's cool. That's, I mean, yeah. The thing is that it doesn't feel very possible for a lot of people. They want, because the idea is, I kind of, when dealing with psychedelics and mental health and using psychedelics to kind of get a hold on an addiction, I feel like psychedelics do a great job at reframing the relationship to those things. Where if you abstain, your relationship hasn't really changed to it, but you
Yeah,
have that stonewalled discipline, which I mean is good. But um, I don't know. I feel like if I could drink and not have to take it to the point that I'm just completely sloshed and that's how I have to take it every time, and have the relationship change to like your child's wedding, or a party that dictates that maybe having a drink with the people around you is appropriate. Like I want to be able and be available to be able to have that, to be participate. And so that's where I struggle with the idea of abstinence. But maybe that's just me, because I don't think that you need it to have fun, but it can be fun.
I think when I look at like the traditional models of AA, like what I have a problem with is it's not built on a true story. I mean, they talk about the spiritual
Oh,
experience, but when you go through and you read, Bill Williamson was writing a letter to Young, I think. Young told him he couldn't help him, and says he's got a friend in Canada who might be able to help him. So he sends him up to Canada to go meet with this Dr. Cohen guy, doses him. I can't remember. I believe it's lysergic, but it might have been something else. Doses him, and he has this spiritual experience where he walks away sober, and then it all gets rebranded into a Christian movement with no discussion of the actual medicine that was used.
right. And then there was the idea that he was wanted the 12th step to be have a psychedelic experience, but the people that had connections to the creation of the organization could not tolerate the introduction of a substance while dealing with the 12th step process. So
Yeah,
you say,
exactly.
no, 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 we have to reword it, we have to rebrand it. And it sucks because it definitely shows the what happens when you have a lot of people that are misinformed, because it's a stigma. It's like, oh, it's a substance, then I already know what it is. I already know what it could do. So I
Well,
know to put a blockade and keep it from coming into this and tainting this organization that could do well when I guess it does well. I mean, if less people are drinking, that's good, especially if they have an issue. But substances aren't bad. It's the relationship to the substances that could be bad.
yeah, and I feel like a lot of the mentality just turns into a try harder like approach when it comes to traditional sobriety through a lot of these groups where you're not taking time to go back and address what the underlying issues are. And it's, I mean, like a great example, like my dad, he doesn't drink, hasn't drank it for like 15 years, I think. No different than when he drank. He's just not drunk when he acts like an asshole. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah,
Sure, but
alcohol is not the problem.
sure. And then people that have numbers like that, like 15 years more, just an impressive amount of time, and then whatever happens, they relapse, whether it's a new trauma or whatever, they relapse, and it's like going back to square one. It's like, oh, do they just give up? It sucks to be faced with just like, oh no, you're going back to the beginning of the process. You're getting you're getting a day one coin, brother. So.
All the hierarchy, I know, right?
Yeah, how do you do it? They're like, ugh.
So Brian, was your dad? Did he have more control over his outrage?
No, God,
No.
no. Yeah, he's your classic example of he's got, yeah, he's got his own problems. I'd wager he's got his own problems. He has deep seated underlying problems. I've never met anybody like him before. Yeah,
I was just
I
wondering, is it better that he's not drinking when he's acting this way?
no, the reason he got sober is because he wanted to prove to his wife that he could stop drinking because it was going to be like his third divorce. And so this is all rooted in ego, not like any desire for personal growth or change.
The motivators.
Yeah, the motivators. Yeah. Yeah, and now he can plug himself into a system of hierarchy where the longer you're there, the more power you have. And when you have unhealthy people, power is magnetic to them, so they'll show up everywhere.
On your fasting thing through the holidays, were you going to cut out coffee also?
I'm sorry, what?
Were you going to cut out caffeine coffee?
I normally don't really drink much coffee. I'll have
Oh.
one cup of coffee, like literally one cup of coffee, like after I go on my walk in the morning. But I'm open to trying anything. You know, I basically just drink water all day. I don't drink sodas or anything. So, I mean, I for the last few months, I've been trying to strip my life down to like just a few things. So, like when I do need to step away, it's not like I'm stepping away from 1,000 things. Now I just have like these 10 things I'm not going to do for a month, and then I can pick them back up later. So, yeah. And I think the big thing is what we were talking about with the sobriety thing is it's not about like being some psychotic disciplined person who doesn't make mistakes. It's about making the mistake and spending time reflecting on why it happened and what can you do in the future to prevent it, you know? I think that's the real issue that I would have is like in every mistake that we make, there is a story about who we are, because we made those decisions because we thought something else is going to happen, because something probably happened in the past that led us to believe that this would be an outcome. And so the whole idea of getting down to who we are and why we're interacting with things the way that we do is the most important question. But the problem is that takes time, and you can't just tell someone to follow directions, because that's AA right there. Any drunk can be sober if he can just follow directions or follow instructions or something like that. So you're just in that hierarchical get in line.
Yeah, that makes me think about being able to step away from these things and being able to pick them back up again if you choose to in the future. It's kind of like it makes me think that when struggling with my own things, if it's just a matter of having things not properly framed. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. So if I could give you a metaphor to frame it, it's like being a warrior who trains with a sword. You train yourself to pick up the sword, you train yourself to carry the sword, you train yourself to defend yourself with the sword and to strike with the sword. But you also have to train yourself to put the sword away. You cannot always carry the sword. And so I feel like sometimes that's like alcohol. You know, we use it to numb ourselves, or any kind of substances or whatever. It's like that sword we defend ourselves with or attack others with, but we have to know how to put the sword away, even that the sword should be put away. It belongs in its sheath. When it's in its sheath, things are the best.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I appreciate that.
Jordan Peterson says, be dangerous, but don't use it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Be what and don't use it?
Dangerous.
Be dangerous?
Yeah. Or this potential for lethality, you know, that people are afraid, but you don't ever jump out in their stuff or anything like that.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Jordan Peterson, but I find that funny. He's a pretty small stature dude too, so I enjoy that. I like him. He's just so angry. He just seems very, very angry. That's the thing that gets me. Yeah.
I don't really like his political stuff, but his psychological stuff seems to really narrow, you know, in on some of the problems people have.
I think in fact, that is what my gripe is. I think he's kind of an effeminate man. And so I think that's actually what he's speaking to in this age, that there's a lot of men out there who've been raised by women. And so he is a voice that they can hear, because it's kind of like a veiled version of their mother, but dressed up as a short Canadian man.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like people that suddenly get a boost in popularity, especially with like in this modern day of social media, you take the parts that really drove the that drove the viewership and kind of just inflate that part, that characteristic. And it seems like he's very good at being upset and then like wrapping around with like a logical rationale or an insightful one. And it makes for not a boring watch, to say the least. So
yeah, loads of drama.
A lot of it makes me wonder how much of it is a character, which I have no doubt that he's an intelligent person, but some of the choices just seem to be a little bit intended to be exciting.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I just go back to what I was saying, man. I really think he's like a voice for the age. I don't think a guy like Jordan Peterson would have gotten any traction in the 1930s. I think you're looking at a man who was raised to be kind and gentle through academia and to supplicate, and he got to a point where all that supplication lost him his ability to teach and his license. And so you're watching a guy who's learning to fight back. And I think that's what everybody's liking, is they're watching someone who is successful professionally, lost it all, and is now fighting back against the system, but doing it intellectually rather than just throwing shit on the wall. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how influential he has become. And I've been trying to figure that out. Like, where's, you know, kind of like Joe Rogan is pretty influential with, you know, the people he interviews and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I will say some of the people that he's had on, man, unbelievably interesting. Hearing all the various conversations that you just never get to hear in the mainstream. Yeah, they just had one with a guy named Mike Benz, completely unrelated, but he's a political analyst that I follow on my own. It's like the biggest black pill episode about like the future of America and the inevitability of war. It's like, dude, come on, man.
What was his name again?
Mike Benz. He's a pretty interesting fellow. He's got a pretty good he's got a pretty good take on modern politics. He doesn't address it from the lens that there's a deep state. He calls it a blob. There's just like this amorphous bureaucracy that is rolling in a direction it wants to go. And there's no like conscious thought behind it. It's just collective ideology all pushing in the same direction. but it's pretty interesting. In the same direction, what I mean is growing bureaucracy because they're all viral, so they just want to get bigger budgets, more power. It's not insidious; it's just how they work. It's what they do. It's an emergent feature.
Right, right. It's part of its nature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was just in Colorado and was informed that at the end of this month, December, they'll be starting the program for psychedelic therapy. I think with psilocybin, kind of like what Oregon has. So
Through
I
the
was
VA?
no, this is you know how Oregon did it. They set it up so it's all regulated. You know the trip sitter, the place that's everyone has to be not regulated but
Getting
licensed to do
licensed.
that. Yes, and I think that's gonna. I don't know if the license. I think the licensing thing is going to start. Colorado in 22 made psilocybin legal. Anyone can grow it, but you just can't sell it. So then, in the last couple of years, they've been trying to figure out how can we create a therapeutic model for this, like kind of like Oregon did. I don't want to say like Oregon because I think I'm not really happy with what you have to
Yeah,
do to
there's
get it
just there's
in
just too
Oregon.
few states to compare to at this time.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So they, in Washington, uh, legally they've been passing some bills, but I heard someone say that if you decrim, no one's going to want to pay for that kind of therapy. But or in Colorado, it's just the opposite. They made it legal, so it's kind of like icing on the cherry on top of the cake. That if people want to go spend money for the therapy thing, they can get mushrooms without, um, like in Oregon. I think that's the only way you can do it. You pay that amount of money.
Yeah,
So,
that's oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I'm just saying this is kind of totally. It's kind of the mirror opposite, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out as far as the demand for it and people paying all that amount of money. I think in Oregon you have to pay $10,000 for the um, licensing per year for the center, the people, the bed with the eye shades and everything like that. So that's why they have to charge much more, higher prices. So anyway, it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to see if it's anything like that.
right. Yeah, so that's the big unfortunate piece, right? Is that these people that are invested, they have to reach a threshold for it to be worth their while, and so you start to close the door on a lot of people that can't flip that bill. And it really sucks. I wish there was a lot more, I guess, more equity as far as people with mental health challenges to be able to have access to all different types of interventions such as this. Um, Unfortunately, it's a matter of time, and I don't doubt that we will get to that point, but we're in the early days, and I don't see that stuff happening maybe until what, a decade more. But I am thankful for um, it sucks, but the VAs that are doing psychedelic studies, such as the Portland, Oregon VA, it's nice that there are some groups that are consolidating and continuing to put out research that is in support of these interventions so that there's just a growing stockpile of evidence so that when there's a matter of policy change and whatnot, that there is um, uh, science-based evidence to fall back on to make an informed decision. Um, and I'm also grateful to to be alive in a time that where these options are more available than they have been. And if you don't have a lot of money, you could fall back onto an organization like Heroic Hearts Project, be able to, for not very much, be able to come out to Oregon for now and engage with a small community of similar veterans to take part in a clinical 5 days, a couple days of uh, introspection. But yeah, hopefully brighter days ahead as we get more evidence in support of these mental health interventions. Um, it's weird though, because a big chunk of change to go into a clinic that's licensed through the state, and then you might not expect to see those people come back again unless they are very wealthy and they're able to just add that to their schedule like a couple times a year. But I mean, if someone's paying top dollar to be able to go into a clinic because they really need it, like what's the likelihood that they'll come back around instead of going into something like the underground? So it's tough. We're trying to figure it out. The growing
It's,
pains are real.
yeah, it's an interesting time. Another thing that I heard about was okay, jumping back in 21 or 22, when COVID was coming in, and the nurses were being so overworked and long hours. They're having to deal with the fear of what if I get COVID. Some of the patients were assaulting them and morally, you know, just really bad. At the University of Washington, they did this microdosing program, a research project. And so I thought, well, sure, that can help for nurses primarily, the other first responders, doctors, and other people like that. But it was published about a week ago. Uh, Journal of the American Medical Association. The guy who led the program is Dr. Anthony Back, Back, and I think the results were very, very promising. And this, a lot of stuff that's been researched is like for PTSD or people who are into life or people who want to have like an experience that changes their life. But this is for people that are, they didn't have a wonderful thing from this because it's microdosing, but they're, where the rubber meets the road, they're sitting there doing all the work and they got a very positive thing from this. So I don't know if there are many other studies like this, but I think this is pretty significant that it really helped these, people out, and maybe that'll help change things.
I'm gonna hit you guys with something. I've heard they talk about during facilitating that the medicine does the work. You know what I mean? Um, and so what I'm kind of struggling with here is like we're trying to create like an industry for facilitators who are able to use these psychedelic substances and facilitate people's journeys and into personal growth and everything. But what I'm struggling with is if the substance works, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a facilitator, but I'm just not sure you can build an industry around facilitation of a substance that works without a facilitator. It's like what you were saying, they'll come for that one trip, you know what I mean? For the guided experience, but then after that, there's really no incentive to ever come back.
I feel like the facilitators are pretty well, I guess it depends on what you could afford or what you're able to do, because what if you have a lot of money but you're not really capable of framing things in a positive way that would serve you into, like, you're having these epiphanies but you don't really know like how to apply them or where to put them. Um, I mean,
I would just caution that I feel like that's a lot of seeking out the Zen master, and when you do that, always watch your pockets. Um, so I don't know. Like I just think that's what the real issue is that because of our Western mind, we're like, oh, we have this substance, and the substance elicits this response. It's therapeutic. Well, then we need a therapist or a therapeutic person to fill that role to give them the substance. But what I'm arguing is, I wonder if the whole like ecosystem actually can't sustain that. The facilitator role is actually one that will fade itself out as these become more and more commonplace.
maybe that's possible. I feel like when I went on the retreat, it wasn't very often that someone was taking advantage of like talking things out with a facilitator. It did happen. It just didn't happen for everybody, and it wasn't constantly happening. Though, I mean, when you're laying down with the headphones on and you're blindfolded and you're like 5 hours in, and you have to like get up and go to the bathroom and get it and refill your cup of water and you're dizzy, there it becomes like really convenient and it's a great addition to have, though. Can you be doing that while your partner goes and helps you
That
to the
sounds.
bathroom?
I'm actually pointing entirely a non-professional stepping into that role.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. Like you're trying to figure out how to make a job that someone could pay their bills off of, and I'm just worried that we're actually looking at a trial phase right now, where in the future this is not going to be a job. This is just going to be something that people will have access to, and then they'll have potentially, it's like you're talking about, if you've never done it before, go out there, have the experience, but after that, most people don't have the $500 to $1,000 to like go back and keep doing that every year. The average person's just trying to get by. So just accepting people for where they're at, I just think that the average person, when they do have one facilitated experience, probably won't go back, but will probably engage in more psychedelics in the future.
Which is kind of funny because it makes me think of the idea of big pharma not wanting to, or the FDA like not pushing through psychedelics as on a federal level being a legitimate form of therapy, because after you do it, then you don't really need them anymore after you have like one or two visits to the clinic, so to speak. You don't
Yep.
really need to come back to the medication, the SSRIs or whatever. Your therapist, maybe. But so it's kind of funny to frame it and to be like, yeah, once you have your trip at the clinic, you kind of get an idea of how things are supposed to go. Well, you get the proper execution framed, and then you could just recreate it on your own.
Yeah, the way I think about that is this whole facilitator role that we have now, it's all been built in order to show the efficacy of the medicine through research. Now that we have the licensure and we have the facilitators in these roles doing the research, once the research becomes established that it works, it makes the facilitator relatively moot.
Yes,
You see what I'm
right.
saying? So it's kind of
Yeah,
like, yeah,
everything's temporary.
yeah. Well, and it's not to say that there's not like great opportunities in this field. I just think there's a lot more self-help ability here. You know what I mean? I just think we're creating a framework where most people don't need this. They maybe once or twice will need it, but outside of that,
I hear you, but I feel like it's part of the path towards validity in the eyes of like the federal government and whatnot. So even though it's not something that will, I see you're right, probably lasting for forever. I feel like it's a checkpoint, it's a threshold on the path.
A
yeah,
lot of the people, I think it was in Bend, they were charging like 3,500 for the, preparation, dispensing, and the integration afterwards, and a lot, and then they had a 3,000 people waiting list. So there's definitely
Wow.
demand. I bet a lot of those people, you know, bleed the stuff from the 70s and were afraid of this, didn't know anything about it, and but it's kind of like part of what they're getting is a lesson on how to do this, like how to ride a bicycle. But once you learn
mhm.
how to ride the bike, you don't have to keep going back for that same lesson over and over. And also, I think a lot of this is modeled after the Johns Hopkins trials, primarily with MDMA that MAPS was doing. And I think they were not charging, but the price to send someone through that, and this was for PTSD, was $23,000. So, we're kind of um, modeling it, thinking that's the model. And I would be willing to say that, and I haven't interviewed every person that's taken psychedelics or mushrooms. I'd say 90% of the people who got benefit didn't do it in a facility like that because they didn't even have that kind of thing. And this is
Hmm.
going back decades, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not trying to squelch what the efforts people are doing, but I mean, back in the day, it was like, you didn't need a license from the state. You just needed a good friend you could trust.
You just needed community, which at the end of the day is what you're trying to look to establish anyway. Like I ask
Sure.
Brian all the time. Brian will inform me of a new development happening around the globe. That's, it could be terrible or it could be just incredibly new. And I say, what do we do now, Brian? He's like, get to know your neighbors and, just like establish community. Um, because I mean, even if you have your healing and everything's good and you go and forward into this healthy, insightful life that you have in front of you, establishing community like in your proximity is going to be a natural thing to do, I would imagine. I mean, get to know your neighbors and being able to rely on people to, you know, have your back if you needed to, but also just to, you know, the strength in numbers, so to speak, not necessarily against like an adversary, but just to life's easier with more people involved, and having a good
De-
community relationships is
Definitely better. Definitely better than going it alone.
yeah, it could be a beautiful. Imagine going to a potluck and you love everyone that's there, and it's like, what's not to like? So
I love the metaphor about learning to ride a bike, because there's a natural outgrowth of that. Once you learn to ride your bike, what you do is you take your bike out on the streets and go see who else is riding bikes.
Find the others, right?
Yeah, exactly. See what the other kids are up to. And that's where you learn stuff. It's like that my whole point about the facilitators, I believe the facilitator role was created for the purposes of validating research, and that I do not think that the role itself can serve as like a full-time job for someone. I could be totally wrong, but I'm just arguing that I think when people have their experiences, they're going to be less likely to come back and do them through that traditional facilitator role. And maybe because of changes like in Colorado and other states where they're just going to begin to decriminalize the personal production of mushrooms, you might create the ecosystem necessary where there'll just be a lot of kids riding bikes out on the street, and they're all going to know how to like bunny hop and shit like that. So yeah, skills, yo.
yeah, bicycle days on everyone's calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
that's a
why
great one. Fucking bicycle day.
Colorado's experience will be really interesting to see how this plays out. Because
Yeah. What's so
every other.
funny?
What's
The
that?
way that they're setting this up is like creating from the way I see this, I see like a perfect opportunity for like an organic grassroots kind of effect by allowing people to do like the individual consumer kind of thing. I have a feeling you're going to end up with this like, and then I told a friend, and then I told a friend, and then I told a friend, and because there is no cost to entry other than like just having a friend who knows about it, you might look at an environment where you could have like a portion of the population engaging in these therapeutics without any real means or records to show that therapeutics are responsible, because there's no facilitators and there's no facilities they're going to. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see what Colorado looks like in 10 years.
Or even a couple of years.
Yeah.
If you run into any more about this BNDF,
BDNF, yeah.
Or BDNF, yeah.
Yeah.
Creating more dendrites in the nerve, longer
Yeah,
dendrites.
dendrite growth, yeah. Basically,
Yeah.
just more neuronal growth.
And if that has an aspect with dementia and growing older and the way our brains normally shrink, that would really be interesting to know.
Yeah. I watched a documentary in one of my classes, and it was about late in life learners, and that was the trick. It was the people that continued to learn things. They're the ones who maintain the synaptic plasticity necessary to be functional late in life and olden age. I mean, one of the big takeaways I got from this was like, holy shit, is having a routine depressing? Because that's what I really think it is that when you live a regimented, like unbelievably regimented life over and over again, without any kind of room for growth or any need for plasticity in your brain, we begin to exhibit what we would call depression. We just start lacking meaning in our lives. And we show that through what we would view as the criteria for depression. And so what I'm arguing is without change, you create the conditions wherein your brain won't grow and you will have what appears to be depression as a result of it.
Is that how you become an NPC?
I wonder if that's how you break away from being an NPC. Like we say the NPC, and that's a great word and everything. The way I look at that is every person is handed a script by their parents about who they're supposed to be. And you're an NPC until you start writing your own script. You know what I mean? And so breaking up this like rigid state of minds and engaging in a bit more growth and plasticity is maybe what it looks like to kind of snap out of it and put the script down and maybe start improvising more.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Maybe not improvising, but being more proactive in it.
Well, the reason I think improvisation is important is it's really hard to improvise when you're not present. By approaching it from that angle, you have to be present and paying attention to what's going on.
Shoot. Well, thanks for coming through, Guy, and helping out with this conversation. I think it was pretty good. We touched on a couple different things. Next show will be in 2025. So everyone have a good Christmas holiday and Happy New Year. And we'll see you in January. We have a show on every third Sunday at 11 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. I enjoyed it. You guys are always fun to